Colorado Territory, 1,869. The western slope of the Rockies loomed in silent judgment over Pine Creek, a hard scrabble settlement where ambition went to die and dreams withered under the merciless frontier sun. Xavier Drake stood at the edge of his modest ranch, squinting at the distant mountains as he rolled up his sleeves against the summer heat. At 25, his face retained a certain boyishness that belied the quiet strength in his lean, muscular frame. His eyes, the color of the sky before a storm, carried the weight of a man who had learned early that solitude was the only reliable companion on the frontier. No point in wanting what you cannot have, Xavier muttered to his horse, a philosophy that had served him well since striking out alone at 17. The son of a drifter and a woman who died, bringing him into the world, Xavier had cobbled together his 160 acres through backbreaking work and stubborn determination. His cabin stood as testament to his self-reliance, small but sturdy like the man himself. Pine Creek locals respected Xavier for his fair dealings and skilled horsemanship, but few had penetrated the careful distance he maintained. The frontier had taught him that attachment was dangerous, a luxury afforded to those who had never watched fever, claim a friend, or witnessed how quickly violence could erupt between desperate men. Better to rely on oneself alone. Family was a risk he could not afford. Love of vulnerability he dared not indulge. What Xavier wanted was simple: to expand his small herd, maybe add another pasture to the north. What he needed, the emptiness that occasionally hollowed his chest on long winter nights, remained unacknowledged, buried beneath practicality and routine. That particular June morning began like countless others. Xavier tended his modest herd of cattle, repaired a section of fence blown down in the night storm, and was heading back to his cabin when distant movement caught his eye. The Eastern Trail rarely brought visitors, especially ones traveling alone. Curiosity piqued. He mounted his dun gelling and rode toward the approaching figure. The woman stumbled more than walked, her blue calico dress torn and mudded. A small, clutched in white-knuckled fingers, appeared to be her only possession. Even from a distance, Xavier could see she was young, certainly no older than 22, with honey blonde hair escaping a once neat bun. Her face, despite being smudged with dirt and marked with exhaustion, possessed a delicate beauty that seemed wildly out of place in the rugged landscape. As he approached, the woman straightened her spine with visible effort, lifting her chin with a dignity that impressed him despite himself. Her eyes, a striking hazel that shifted between green and amber in the morning light, met his with neither pleading nor fear, only resolute determination. "Ma'am?" Xavier touched the brim of his hat. "You appear to be a fair piece from anywhere. Are you lost?" "No," she replied, her voice unexpectedly steady. "I know precisely where I am not welcome, and I have left that place behind." A slight Eastern accent colored her words. Xavier frowned. "And where might you be headed?" "Forward," she said simply, then swayed on her feet. He was off his horse in an instant, catching her elbow before she could fall. The woman stiffened at his touch, but did not pull away. "Named Xavier Drake?" "My ranch is just beyond that rise." He gestured with his free hand. "Whatever your troubles, you need rest and water before continuing on." She hesitated, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortably aware of his 3-day stubble and dust-covered clothes. "Rebecca Zimmerman," she finally offered. "I was traveling to my cousin in Denver, but circumstances," she faltered. "Circumstances changed." Xavier noticed the slight swell beneath her dress, then the protective way her free hand curved around her middle understanding dawned with uncomfortable clarity. An unmarried woman with child was unwelcome nearly everywhere in the territory. The judgment of Pine Creek would be swift and merciless. Every instinct warned him to walk away. Other people's troubles had a way of becoming your own on the frontier. Yet something in Rebecca's proud stance, the quiet dignity with which she bore her burden, struck a chord in Xavier that he thought had long since gone silent. "My horse can't carry us both back to the ranch," he found himself saying. "You can rest there while sorting your plans." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. "You would help a stranger, a woman in my condition." "I reckon a person's business is their own," Xavier replied, surprised by his own words. "Out here we all have pasts better left unspoken." The moment Rebecca Zimmerman accepted his hand and allowed him to help her onto his horse, Xavier's carefully ordered world began to shift. As they rode toward his cabin, her slight frame pressed against his back. He felt an unfamiliar sensation, like the ground beneath him had suddenly become uncertain territory. He told himself it was merely the inconvenience of an unexpected guest, nothing more. What Xavier could not know was that this chance encounter on a dusty Colorado trail would challenge everything he believed about solitude, safety, and what it meant to truly live in a land where survival and loneliness often walked hand in hand. The days that followed fell into an uneasy routine. Rebecca slept in Xavier's bed while he took to a bedroll near the fireplace. She insisted on earning her keep despite being nearly 6 months along. By her accounting, her hands, soft from what must have been a genteel upbringing, quickly blistered and calloused as she cooked, cleaned, and even helped with the lighter ranch chores. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the alpenglow paint the distant mountains, Rebecca broke their unspoken agreement not to discuss their pasts. "My father was a banker in Philadelphia," she said quietly. "When I found myself in this condition, he gave me 2 choices: marry the man responsible or leave his house forever." She traced a pattern on her skirt. The man was already married. "My father knew this when he arranged our meetings, hoping for a business connection through me." Xavier remained silent, watching the shadows lengthen across his modest property. "I chose to leave," Rebecca continued. "My cousin in Denver promised shelter, but I received word on my journey that her husband forbade it when he learned of my situation." A bitter smile crossed her face. "It seems moral indignation is a luxury afforded to those who have never faced impossible choices." The quiet that followed felt charged with unspoken understanding. Xavier finally spoke, his voice rough with disuse. "My father was a wanderer who left my mother before I was born. She died bringing me into this world. He kept his eyes on the distant mountains. I was raised by whoever would take me in until I was old enough to work. Learned early that depending on others leads to disappointment." Rebecca turned toward him, her hazel eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "Yet here you are, taking in a stranger when everyone else turned away." Xavier shifted uncomfortably. "It's temporary, of course," she agreed too quickly, looking away. The conversation should have ended there, but Xavier found himself continuing. "Built this place from nothing. Started with 4 cows and a half-broken stallion. Now I have 20 head in this land." Pride colored his voice, "Not much by some standards, but it's mine. Nobody can take it from me." "It's impressive," Rebecca said softly, "to build something lasting in a place so unforgiving." A peculiar warmth spread through Xavier's chest at her words. He stood abruptly, should check the north pasture fence before full dark. As July melted into August, Pine Creek began to take notice of Xavier's house guest. The first time he brought Rebecca to the general store, silence fell like a heavy curtain. Martha Wilson, the storekeeper's wife, whose tongue was sharper than her husband's razors, made her opinion clear. "Well, if it isn't Xavier Drake and his company," she said loudly. "How Christian of you to take in such a troubled soul." Rebecca's face flushed, but she met the older woman's gaze steadily. "Mr. Drake has indeed shown Christian charity, Mrs. Wilson, more than many who merely speak of such virtues on Sundays." Xavier suppressed a smile at the stunned expression on Martha Wilson's face. As they left the store with their supplies, he found himself walking taller, inexplicably proud of how Rebecca had handled herself. "I should perhaps stay at the cabin next time," Rebecca said once they were out of your shot. "I don't wish to damage your standing in town." "My standing," Xavier laughed. A rare sound that surprised them both. "Mrs. Wilson has disapproved of me since I refused to court her niece 3 years back. Besides, a man who concerns himself with gossip isn't much of a man at all." Rebecca studied his profile. "You're not what I expected when I first met you, Xavier Drake." Something in her voice made him glance at her, catching a softness in her expression that sent an unfamiliar flutter through his chest. He quickly looked away, focusing on loading their supplies into the wagon. "Don't go making me into something I'm not," he said gruffly. "I'm just a man trying to get by." August brought relentless heat that baked the land and tested nerves. Xavier found himself increasingly aware of Rebecca's presence. The scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite frontier limitations, the sound of her humming as she worked, the way sunlight caught in her honey blonde hair when she stood on the porch at dawn. One scorching afternoon, as Rebecca hung laundry while Xavier repaired tack on the porch, 3 riders approached. Xavier recognized Samuel Thornton, owner of the largest ranch in the county, flanked by 2 of his hands. Thornton had been pressuring smaller ranchers to sell for months. Xavier set aside his work and stood. "Thornton," he acknowledged coolly. The older man dismounted with the heavy confidence of someone used to getting his way. His eyes flickered to Rebecca before returning to Xavier. "Drake," he nodded. "Been meaning to speak with you about my previous offer. Price of cattle's dropping. Might be the last chance you'll get at a fair deal for this." He gestured dismissively. "Modest operation." Xavier felt his jaw tighten. "My answer hasn't changed, not selling." Thornton smiled without warmth. "Heard you've taken in some company, expensive, keeping a woman, especially one in a delicate condition." His implication hung in air. "Might find yourself needing that money sooner than you think." Rebecca had gone still by the clothesline, her hands frozen on a damp shirt. Xavier stepped forward, placing himself between her and Thornton's view. "You've had my answer," Xavier said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now I suggest you ride on before this becomes unfriendly." Thornton's smile disappeared. "Just trying to help a neighbor who's clearly taken on more than he can handle. That girl's trouble, Drake. Everyone in Pine Creek knows it." Xavier's hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip. "Last warning, Thornton." Older rancher held his gaze for a long moment before chuckling. "No need for that. Just being neighborly." He mounted his horse. "Offer stands until the first snow. After that, you're on your own when winter hits." With a nod to his men, they rode away. Xavier watched until they disappeared from sight, then turned to find Rebecca had vanished into the cabin. He found her inside, hands trembling, and she aggressively kneaded bread dough. "I should leave," she said without looking up. "I'm bringing trouble to your door. Thorn's been after my land since before you arrived," Xavier replied, leaning against the door frame. "He's a problem of my own making." Rebecca slammed the dough down with unexpected force. "I heard what he said. What everyone in town thinks. That I'm yours." She stopped, unable to voice it. "That this child is yours, and you're too honorable to admit it." Xavier crossed the room and gently took the dough from her flour-covered hands. "People will think what they want to think. Truth doesn't much matter to those determined to judge. But your reputation, my reputation," Xavier interrupted, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice, "is the least of my concerns. You staying or going should be about what's best for you and that child, not what Thornon or Pine Creek thinks." Rebecca looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why are you really helping me, Xavier?" "The truth." The question caught him off guard. He stepped back, creating distance between them. "I told you." No, she insisted, not what you tell yourself, the truth. Xavier turned away, moving to the window where he could see his land stretching toward the mountains. The land that was supposed to be enough. The solitude he had convinced himself was freedom rather than emptiness. Maybe, he said quietly, I know something about being unwanted. Rebecca moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. I want to stay, she whispered, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because for the first time since I can remember, I feel safe. Xavier looked down at her at the determination in her eyes and the gentle curve of her belly that housed a new life. Something shifted inside him, a wall crumbling that he had spent years fortifying. Then stay, he said simply. September brought cooler temperatures and unexpected joy. Xavier found himself awakening each morning with an unfamiliar anticipation for the day ahead. He expanded the vegetable garden at Rebecca's suggestion, built shelves for her growing collection of preserved foods, and even constructed a cradle from pine boards that he sanded until they were satin smooth. The evening, Rebecca felt the baby kick strongly enough for Xavier to feel it, too. Something fundamental changed between them. His large hand rested tentatively on her rounded belly, his expression transforming from uncertainty to wonder as tiny feet pressed against his palm. That's quite a fighter you've got there, he said, his voice hushed with reverence. She takes after her mother. Rebecca replied with a smile. Xavier looked up, meeting her eyes. Rebecca nodded. Just a feeling. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Xavier's hand remained on her belly, and Rebecca's smaller one covered his. When he finally pulled away, it was with reluctance. That night, lying on his bedroll beside the dying fire, Xavier confronted the truth he had been avoiding. He was falling in love with Rebecca Zimmerman, her quiet strength, her gentle determination, her way of making his cabin feel like more than shelter from the elements. For the first time, it felt like home. The realization terrified him. Loving her meant vulnerability, risk, the possibility of loss. The frontier had taught him that happiness was as fragile as morning frost, beautiful but doomed to vanish under the harsh light of reality. October brought the first dusting of snow, and a letter that shattered their tentative peace. Xavier returned from town to find Rebecca sitting at the table, her face pale as she clutched a cream-colored envelope. It's from my father, she said hollowly. He's discovered my whereabouts. Xavier set down the supplies he'd carried in. How, my cousin in Denver, Rebecca explained. When I wrote to tell her I had found refuge, she must have informed him. She looked up, fear evident in her eyes. He's coming to take me back to Philadelphia. Says he's found a solution to my disgrace. Xavier's blood ran cold. When he'll arrive by month's end, Rebecca's hands trembled as she folded the letter. He controls everything, my inheritance, my future. I have no legal means to defy him. Xavier knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. You don't have to go. You don't understand, Rebecca said, desperation edging into her voice. My father is not a man accustomed to being denied. He has connections, influence. He could make trouble for you. Claim you've compromised me. Demand restitution. Let him try, Xavier said, a fierce protectiveness surging through him. This is my land, my territory. Rebecca touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. And you've become my heart, she whispered, which is why I cannot allow him to destroy what you've built. Before Xavier could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Miller stood on the porch, his expression grim. Drake, he nodded. Miss Zimmerman, got some news you should know. Samuel Thornton filed papers in Denver, claiming this land was sold to him. Says he has a signed deed. Xavier stiffened. That's impossible. The sheriff shrugged. Just telling you what I heard. Might want to check your property markers. Word is Thornton's men have been moving them when folks aren't looking. Hard to prove your boundaries if the markers shift. After the sheriff departed, Xavier paced the small cabin like a caged predator. Thornton's trying to steal my land through legal channels now, and your father's coming to drag you back east. Seems troubles are mounting from all sides. Rebecca watched him, her hands protectively cradling her growing belly. Perhaps this is a sign that we were foolish to believe. To believe what? Xavier demanded, stopping his pacing to face her. That we could create something lasting, something good. Rebecca's voice wavered. The frontier takes more than it gives. Xavier, you taught me that. Xavier stared at her, suddenly seeing how his own fears had shaped her thinking. The woman, who had arrived with such determination, now echoed his fatalistic view. A perspective he was no longer certain he believed. I was wrong, he said, the words feeling like liberation, about the frontier, about what's possible. He crossed to her, taking her hands. I don't want Thornton's money or your father's approval. I want this land, this life. He hesitated, then added softly, with you. Hope flickered in Rebecca's eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying we fight for the land, for your freedom, for what we've built together. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Xavier rode the boundaries of his property, documenting where Thornton's men had indeed shifted markers. Rebecca wrote to a lawyer in Denver who had once helped a friend of her cousin, a man known for taking cases against powerful interests. Their evenings took on a new intimacy as they planned their future together. Xavier spoke of expanding the cabin, adding rooms for the growing family he now dared to imagine. Rebecca shared dreams of establishing a small school for the children of neighboring ranches. They were so focused on the threats they knew, Thornton's land grab and Rebecca's father, that they failed to notice another danger until it was upon them. The early winter storm struck without warning. One moment the October sky was clear. The next, dark clouds rolled over the mountains like a tidal wave. Xavier had ridden out at dawn to check the herd, intending to move them to the sheltered southern pasture. Rebecca stood at the cabin door, watching as the first snowflakes began to fall, unnaturally thick and heavy. Wind whipped across the valley with increasing ferocity, carrying the promise of something far worse than an early dusting. By mid-morning, the storm had become a howling blizzard. Xavier had not returned. Rebecca paced anxiously, stoking the fire and peering through frost-coated windows into a world turned white. When she could stand it no longer, she donned Xavier's spare coat and ventured to the barn, fighting the wind every step. Inside, she found his bay mare still in her stall. Whatever had delayed Xavier, he was out there on foot, or with only his gelling for company. Rebecca's decision was made in an instant. She saddled the mare, ignoring the protests of her heavy belly and the voice of caution in her mind. Xavier had told her enough about mountain storms to know that survival without shelter was measured in hours, not days. Leading the mare out into the storm was like stepping into a different world. Snow stung her face, and the wind threatened to tear her from the saddle. Rebecca oriented herself toward the southern pasture and urged the horse forward. One arm curved protectively around her unborn child. The journey that should have taken 30 minutes stretched endlessly. Twice she became disoriented, the landscape rendered unrecognizable by the swirling snow. Only the mare's instincts kept them moving in the right direction. When Rebecca finally spotted a dark shape against the white, her heart leaped. Xavier's gelling stood with its back to the wind, and beside it, a huddled figure half buried in snow. Xavier was conscious, but barely so. His lips blue with cold. His leg was pinned beneath his Jelling's body. The horse had slipped on ice and fallen, trapping its rider before dying of exhaustion and exposure. "Rebecca," Xavier's voice was weak with disbelief. "You shouldn't be out here. The baby is coming with me to bring you home," she finished, dismounting with difficulty. The snow reached her knees. "Can you stand if I free your leg?" Working together in the howling storm, they managed to shift the dead horse enough for Xavier to pull free. His leg wasn't broken, but badly bruised. Supporting him, Rebecca helped him onto the mayor's back, then pulled herself up behind him. "You could have died coming after me," Xavier said as they slowly made their way back toward the cabin, barely visible through the white haze. "And you would have died if I hadn't," Rebecca replied against his back, her arms tied around his waist. "That's what family does, Xavier. They find each other no matter the storm, family." The word echoed in Xavier's mind as he fought to stay conscious. Not solitude, not isolation, family. They reached the cabin as darkness fell, stumbling inside, half frozen. Rebecca built up the fire with trembling hands, then helped Xavier remove his frozen clothes. As she tended to his injured leg, applying salve and bandages, Xavier washed her face in the firelight. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Rebecca's hand stilled. "What, marry me?" Xavier repeated, reaching for her hand. "And not because of Thornton or your father. Not because of the baby. Because I love you, Rebecca Zimmerman. Because I was half alive before you stumbled down that trail and into my life." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes. "You're delirious from cold. I'm seeing clearly for the first time," Xavier insisted. "I thought I needed nothing but this land and my own 2 hands. I was wrong. I need you. I need the family we can build together." Rebecca leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Drake." The following days brought both recovery and confrontation. Xavier's leg healed slowly while the storm's aftermath kept visitors away. A temporary reprieve they both knew wouldn't last. Their respite ended on a clear November morning when 2 carriages approached the cabin. From the window, Rebecca recognized her father's tall figure in the first, while Samuel Thornton's bulky frame emerged from the second. "They've joined forces," she said quietly. "My father and Thornton." Xavier stood beside her, leaning lightly on a walking stick. "Makes sense. Your father wants you back. Thornton wants the land. Each can help the other." Rebecca turned to him, determination hardening her features. "We stand together always," Xavier agreed, taking her hand. They met their visitors on the porch. Edward Zimmerman, a severe man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and cold eyes, surveyed his daughter with open disapproval. "Rebecca," he said stiffly, "you look." His gaze lingered on her swollen belly. "Unwell. Gather your things. We leave immediately. Hello." "Father," Rebecca replied with remarkable composure, "I'm not going anywhere." Edward's expression darkened. "This is not a request. I am still your legal guardian. This frontier experiment of yours is over." Samuel Thornton stepped forward, a falsely conciliatory smile on his face. "Now, Drake, let's be reasonable. I have paperwork showing this land is rightfully mine. You're squatting illegally, which means you have no right to keep the young lady here against her father's wishes." Xavier's hand tightened around his walking stick. "Your paperwork is a fraud. Thornton, you moved my boundary markers and falsified documents. As for Rebecca, she's a grown woman capable of making her own choices. My daughter," Edward cut in, "is clearly not in her right mind. No woman of sound judgment would choose this." He gestured dismissively at the modest cabin over the comforts and propriety of Philadelphia society. Rebecca stepped forward. "I'm 21 years old, Father, old enough to know my own mind." She took Xavier's hand. "And I choose this life. This man, the family we're building together." Edward's face re-ended. "You are coming home where arrangements have been made to handle your condition." Discreetly, the child will be placed with a suitable family, and you will have a chance to restore your reputation. The only arrangement I've made, Rebecca replied steadily, is to marry Xavier Drake. We've already spoken to the minister in Pine Creek. The ceremony is next week. Thornton laughed. Marriage? Drake can barely feed himself, let alone a wife and bastard child. Xavier stepped forward. But a voice from behind the carriages interrupted. I'd watch your accusations, Thornton. Sheriff Miller approached on horseback, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in a city suit. This is Mr. Harrison from the Denver Land Office. The sheriff explained. He's investigated those boundary claims and found some interesting evidence. The city man dismounted, nodding politely to all present. We've uncovered several instances of fraudulent land transfers connected to Mr. Thornton's operations. Multiple boundary markers on at least 5 properties have been moved from their registered positions. Thornton's face went from red to white. This is absurd. I'll have your badge, Miller, and you. He jabbed a finger toward Harrison. Will regret making such accusations. Threatening a federal land agent, Harrison noted calmly. I'll add that to my report. While Thornton sputtered, Edward Zimmerman seized his opportunity. This land dispute is irrelevant. I'm here for my daughter and I will not leave without her. The attorney from Denver stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Zimmerman, I have documents here establishing Miss Zimmerman's legal independence, as she's over 21 and no longer financially dependent on you. Colorado territory recognizes her as her own guardian. Edward turned to Rebecca, his expression shifting from anger to calculated persuasion. Daughter, think reasonably. Your inheritance, your place in society, all will be lost if you stay in this wilderness. I found something more valuable than inheritance. Rebecca replied softly, I found home. Xavier squeezed her hand, then addressed both men. You've had your say, now I'll have mine. This is my land, legally owned and worked by my hands. Rebecca stays because she chooses to, not because I or anyone else commands it. He looked directly at Edward. You're welcome to know your grandchild, sir, if you can accept our marriage and our choices. If not, the trail east is clear, and I suggest you take it before the next snow. For a tense moment, it seemed Edward might erupt in rage. Instead, his shoulders sagged slightly. Looking at his daughter, truly seeing her perhaps for the first time, he asked, Are you certain, Rebecca? This life will be hard. Nothing like what you were raised to expect. I'm certain, she answered. I've never been more certain of anything. Edward nodded once, then turned and walked to his carriage without another word. Thornton, facing the sheriff and land agent, recognized his defeat. This isn't over, Drake. He growled as he climbed into his carriage. Yes, Xavier replied calmly. It is. They stood together on the porch, watching as both carriages disappeared down the trail. Only when they were out of sight did Rebecca release a shuddering breath, leaning heavily against Xavier. He'll never forgive me, she whispered. He might, Xavier said, surprising her. Time changes people, shows them what truly matters. He placed his hand on her belly, feeling the child move beneath his palm. Well, leave that door open if you want. Rebecca looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. When did you become the optimist between us? Xavier laughed, a free and open sound that echoed across the valley. When a stubborn woman showed me that some risks are worth taking. The wedding took place the following week in Pine Creek's small church. To everyone's surprise, Edward Zimmerman appeared at the last moment, standing stiffly in the back. Though he departed immediately after the ceremony without speaking to the couple, he left a letter for Rebecca containing the deed to her inheritance and an awkwardly worded invitation to correspond. Winter settled fully over the Colorado highlands, transforming the landscape into a gleaming white expanse. In the expanded cabin, with a new room already prepared for the coming child, Xavier and Rebecca built their life together. Each evening they sat before the fire, planning the spring planting, discussing how to improve the cattle herd and imagining their Child's first steps across the porch, Xavier had widened for that very purpose. On a particularly cold January night, as snow drifted against the windows and the wind sang through the eaves, Rebecca went into labor. Hours later, as dawn broke over the eastern plains, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to challenge the frontier itself. They named her Hope, a declaration of their belief in the future they were creating together. That spring, as new calves wobbled on spindly legs, and the first green shoots emerged from the garden, Xavier stood on his porch, watching Rebecca rock their daughter in the early morning light. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, no longer a barrier, but a protective embrace around the valley he had come to love. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked, looking up to find his eyes on her. Xavier smiled, the easy smile of a man who had found his true purpose. "I was thinking about that day you walked down the trail and into my life. How close I came to riding past because I was afraid of complication." Rebecca shifted Hope to her shoulder, the baby's downy head tucked under her chin, and now I know that what I thought was strength standing alone was just fear wearing a brave face. He joined her on the bench, wrapping his arm around his wife and daughter. "You gave me the family I never had. Rebecca, you showed me that the frontier isn't just about survival. It's about building something that lasts beyond ourselves." As the sun climbed higher over Pine Creek Valley, warming the land that would sustain generations of drakes to come, Rebecca leaned into her husband's embrace. "We found each other when everyone else turned away," she said softly. "Perhaps that's the greatest fortune of all." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple, then to his daughter's head. "No perhaps about it," he murmured. "It's the only fortune worth having." Together, they watched the day brighten over their land, their home, their family, proof that even in the untamed wilderness of the American frontier, love could take root and flourish, stronger than the mountains and as enduring as the endless western sky.